Radio Now 100.9's Indy Connection with Emily Metheny.
Hi, I'm Emily Metheny, your host. Coming up in a little over 2 months, we have our first election this year, the preliminaries. I spoke with Jeremy Burton from the Marion County Board of Voters to find out what people need to do to make sure they are registered to vote in this election and everything else they need to know before they take to the polls on May 5th. Jeremy, can you tell me a little bit about what you do with the Marion County Board of Voters?
Sure. I'm the Chief Deputy Director for Marion County Board of Voters Registration, and we are tasked with managing our county's voter rolls and making sure they're up to date and that everyone that should be allowed to vote votes.
And we do have an election coming up soon. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. The upcoming primary election is on Tuesday, May 5th, 2020, and polls are open from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., and residents can vote at any vote center in the county on that day.
And with it being the preliminaries on May 5th, by what point do people need to be registered to vote?
Sure. They need to be registered to vote by April the 6th because voter registration closes down 29 days before Election Day.
And where can people register to vote?
You can register to vote online at indianavoters.com. On that website, you can also download the form and mail that in. The address is on the form if you prefer to register by mail. But it's very easy to register online. All you need is an Indiana driver's license number or Indiana online. If you have neither of those, you can still register via the mail.
And if you also moved or you need to change something, how is that also on indianavoters.com.org?
Same form online, same form that you could print off and mail in as well.
Excellent. And when would I need to update my voter registration? And how close
you have until April the 6th to update your voter registration.
So the drop date to be able to vote on May 5th is April 6th.
Yep, and you have until 11:59 p.m. that night to submit the online form.
Excellent. And then where can people find who's on this ballot?
Sure. You on indianavoters.com, you also have who's on the ballot, and you can look at who's on your ballot on the same website.
Excellent. And then between the preliminaries and then what's happening this November, what's the difference between these elections?
Sure. In the primary election, you'll be asked to choose a Republican or Democratic ballot, and you'll be voting on candidates in either of those parties. And in the fall, you'll be voting for all the candidates on the same ballot. That is, the nominees from the Republican Party and the Democratic Party and any other party that made the fall ballot.
Okay. And then when someone goes to vote on May 5th, what do they need to bring with them?
The only thing they need to bring is their photo ID with them. And your ID must have a photo, your name, an expiration date that is current or expired since the last general election. And it must be issued by either the state of Indiana or the federal government. So a passport would work, an Indiana driver's license, public schools, IDs from some universities work as well. And by the way, the address on your ID does not have to match your voter registration address because the photo is looking just at your identity, not at your address.
Okay. So if I don't have a driver's license, I can use my state-issued ID or my passport.
That's right. And if you're a veteran and you have a veteran's ID, you can use that as well.
And if someone doesn't live in Marion County, where can they find their polling locations?
The same website, indianavoters.com, has all that information for the entire state.
And for the preliminaries, are you able to send in an absentee ballot if you're not in your current county?
Absolutely. On that same indianavoters.com website, you can download the form to request an absentee ballot. Additionally, there's early voting that happens that will be listed on that website as well. So if you can either vote early in person at the courthouse or city county building here in Marion County, or at any of the satellite locations that open up around the county, and you can vote at those places in person. You can also vote absentee by mail and receive your ballot in the mail and then mail it back to the election board.
Excellent. And then for the teenagers this might be their first time voting, at what point do you have to be 17, 18, and how does that work?
Sure. So you can vote in the primary election in May if you are going to be 18 years old by the general election day, which is November the 3rd, 2020. So if you turn 18 on November the 3rd, 2020, you still have the right to vote in the May 2020 primary, as long as none of the contests on that ballot are definitive. So they would get a ballot that didn't have any public questions on it. That is where the contest results are final in that election. Most of the contests on a primary ballot are not final in that election. That is, you move to the general to get a final result, if that makes any sense.
A little bit. So when you mean contest, what do you mean by that? The people...
So, for example, if you're in a primary election voting on the party's nominee for governor, for example, you're just voting on which candidate's going to be on the fall ballot. You're not voting on whether the candidate's going to take that office or not. Whereas in a public question, where there might be a public question on your ballot that says, should we raise taxes, yes or no? That's not going to move to the fall. The final result of that primary election is the result for that contest. And that's where the 17-year-old would not be allowed to vote on that question.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep, okay.
All right, and then how long does the actual process of voting take, either this May or this November? How long should someone expect if it's their first time voting?
No longer than 15 minutes. It's going to be a very quick process.
Excellent. And is there anything else you'd like to add about this upcoming in May or coming up this November?
Just reminding everyone that if you're not registered to vote, or if you need to update your registration with a new name or a new address, don't hesitate to very quickly go on IndianaVoters.com and do that very easily. It's easy to do, and at the very least, go on IndianaVoters.com just to check your registration and make sure that you're registered at the correct address so that you're ready to make your voice heard in May.
And then if I'm not able to vote or I miss going on May 5th, am I still able to vote in November?
Absolutely, as long as you're registered to vote. Absolutely.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Jeremy. I really appreciate you taking time to talk to me today.
My pleasure. Anytime.
To find your polling location, update your registration, or see who's on the ballot, visit IndianaVoters.com. The deadline to register for this election is April 6th. Have you finished your taxes yet, or are you waiting for more help to get them filed? Brian Ashcraft from Liberty Tax talked with me about how you can be better prepared to get your taxes filed before the deadline of April 15th. Brian Ashcraft is the ADP of Operations with Liberty Tax. Brian, can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Oh, sure. Hi. Thanks for having me on. I help oversee the operations for Liberty Tax, not only in the Indianapolis area, but all across the country. And we make sure we've got franchise and small business owners all across the country that provide tax preparation services for individuals and small businesses. Excellent.
And the tax deadline is coming up in a little over a month. And that deadline is April 15th this year, right?
April the 15th.
Like always. And I do have some questions for you about filing, especially for some of our audience who are first-time filers.
Yeah, so I know a lot of times if you're filing for the first time, it can be a nerve-wracking experience. You're not even sure if you filled out a W-4 correctly or even know what your W-4 was when you filled it out. And so one of the things I always recommend for folks when they're filing for the first time is going and see a tax professional. They can give you a lot of information, provide a lot of guidance and advice for you as you're entering into this world. And it's not because you can't figure it out, but it's because people just simply don't like taxes most of the time, or they think they're not numbers people, or they've got more productive, better things to do with their time, and so they haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it. So it's a great opportunity to go in, and like you would do with any other thing that seems to have a lot of value or importance in your life, you would get the advice from a professional that does this on a regular basis. And so I'd always recommend that for a first-time filer.
Excellent. And then why are people better off going to a tax professional in general?
You know, it's kind of interesting when you look at it. There's a lot of things that you do yourself, and sometimes you walk away with a sense of pride on. Typically, people don't do their taxes and walk away and say, look what I did myself. It's usually something that they dread going into, and they spend a lot of time on it, and actually becomes a point of stress and anxiety that they place on themselves. And so it's just a way to take some of that stress and anxiety on a very cumbersome process and turning it over to somebody that does it on a regular basis. And most people just think they've got better things to do with their time than sit around and try to figure out a complicated tax code that changes every year.
And typically, how long would it take if they went to a professional versus doing it themselves? How long would it take to file their taxes?
You know, the IRS actually puts out a guide when they put the forms and how long it would take. And many of the forms, it says, hey, if you're just taking a crack at this, it'll take you a couple of hours. We see people in our offices all the time that have worked on their tax return for weeks. They do this in their spare time at nights and weekends. But if you sit down with a tax professional, you can typically get through the process. I usually say, hey, set aside an hour. Sometimes you can get a general interview, and you might have to go home and get some paperwork and come back. But sometimes if all is well and everything's in line, you can get the whole process done in an hour.
Oh, wow.
It'll save you a lot of time for sure.
And what's the number one mistake that people make when they're doing their own taxes?
You know, it's kind of crazy because taxes are very unique, and so it's all over the board. But we have a lot of people that come into our offices that have tried the tax return themselves, and surprisingly enough, it's simply they've answered a question the wrong way. The questions are asked in such a way that you thought you were answering no, but you're answering yes, and so that got you confused, and you answered yes instead of no, and it disqualified you for a particular tax credit, and so it really had an impact on your refund. So we see a lot of those simple mistakes where people just simply didn't know what to check, and so they left something blank, or they didn't know if they were qualified for something, and so they didn't answer a question. And really what they did was leave a lot of money on the table or leave some deductions that they were entitled to simply because they didn't know 100%. And when most people, when it comes to the IRS, they say, I'd rather be safe than sorry, because people actually are scared of the IRS, so they don't want to take a lot of chances. But these deductions and credits are things that they're perfectly entitled to, and they should take full advantage of.
And that can be like having a child. It can be a different tax credit, correct?
Right. And so when you're answering, you know, even things like if you have a newborn child and it says, did the child live with you for all 12 months? You're like, well, my child's not even 12 months old. How could they have lived with me all 12 months? And so things like that, people don't know how to answer those questions to get to see if their child is a qualified dependent or not.
Mm-hmm. And there are other ones, including like the Earned Income Tax and the American Opportunity Tax Credit, where people can come to you and find out what these mean, right?
Yeah, these types of credits are out there. And if you look, the IRS every year says, hey, there's billions of dollars that are left on the table. And what they're really doing is they're saying, hey, people that would qualify for certain credits, like the Earned Income Tax Credit or the Additional Child Tax Credit, or even Education Credit, the American Opportunity Tax Credit, they would be entitled to those credits. Not only do they reduce the amount of tax that you would have to pay, these credits actually are refundable credits, so they could reduce your tax liability to zero and then get you a large tax refund in addition to that based on the credits if you apply those correctly. And any Liberty Tax office will be able to help you navigate what those credits are and if you qualify for them.
Excellent. And then what happens if you've done this before and you go to pay and find out all your tax return, if you get money back or if you have to pay? What happens if you find out that you actually have to pay?
Well, there's a couple of things that happen when you have to pay. The first is surprise and shock, typically, when people are like, I wasn't expecting this. And so there's actually a couple of different options. The first thing I want to remind everyone, if you owe taxes at the end when you go to file your tax return, Some people think, oh, I just won't file this year because I owe money and I don't have the money to pay. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of different options. So you can, it's best to go ahead and file your tax return, because things only get worse if you don't file a tax return, because then there's penalties for not filing timely and more interest adds up with that. So you want to go ahead and file that tax return and then pay what you can when you file the tax return. And then, any Liberty Tax Office would be able to help you set up an installment agreement with the IRS where you can make a payment plan. There's also things like an offer and compromise where you could negotiate for that, and the professionals at Liberty Tax would be able to help you with that. And we also have a service called the Liberty Tax Debt Resolution, where we've got licensed attorneys and CPAs and enrolled agents who have experience negotiating these various types of solutions to the burdensome tax debt. And they can actually negotiate for you and hopefully or possibly help you get out from under that tax burden and help you breathe a little easier. But the first step is to file that tax return, and then we can walk you through that process on your options of either an installment agreement or make an offer and compromise or go the tax debt resolution pathway.
And let's say I did my taxes and I realize I did them wrong. I've already sent everything away. And how would I do an amended tax? How would I amend my taxes that I've already sent in?
Yeah, that's actually another very common scenario that we see in our offices on a regular basis. And sometimes, Emily, it's actually surprising. You'll see a couple come in and the husband or the wife, either one of them will think, oh, I don't think we did our taxes right. And that's usually they don't think the other person did their taxes right. And they don't want to say that. We said, no, let's take a look at that. So you're not out of luck or in despair at that. As a matter of fact, at any Liberty office that you walk in, tax advice and free double checks, they're always free. So we'll look over your tax return, let you know if it's correct. We'll also give you free tax advice when you sit down with one of our trained tax professionals. But a couple of things we can walk through, make sure you got your tax return correct. If we find something that isn't correct, it's not too late. We could do an amended tax return. Now, the refund of that takes a little bit longer than you might be used to if you file a regular tax return in the tax season and do it electronically. But if you're patient over 8 to 12 weeks, we can get you that refund back if there's any money that's due your way by filing an amended tax return for you.
And you can file those even after the April 15th deadline, correct?
That's correct. And any refund that you have coming back to you, you actually got the 3 previous tax seasons. You can go back and amend those returns and still claim those refunds from 3 years back.
Excellent. And typically, how long does it take for someone to get their tax refund back if it's not amended?
If it's not amended, the IRS runs pretty quickly. It's typically between 8 and 15 days in order to get your refund back if you file electronically and do direct deposit.
And quickly, Brian, can you tell me where people can find Liberty Tax and your services?
They can walk into one of our offices there in Indianapolis or visit us online at libertytax.com and go under Office Locator to find an office near them.
And excellent. One last thing for you. What do people need to bring when they come in or when they're filing taxes in general?
I like to remind people, anytime you get something in the mail that says important tax document enclosed, grab a hold of that. But anything that has anything to do with income or payments that you made regarding taxes or anything on your house or your business, bring as much documentation as you can in. And then I like to let people know, I'd rather tell you what you didn't need to bring as opposed to what you should have brought in after you get there. So anything related to any kind of money that you paid out for taxes, city, local, state, or for any expenses that you have associated with a business or any way to generate income, you'll want to bring that information in with you.
So that would also include, if I was freelancing, it'd be my miles I traveled and different expenses, correct?
100%.
Excellent. And Brian, thank you for calling in and talking with me ahead of tax season. Well, during tax season, I guess.
You bet. Thanks so much for having me, Emily.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Remember, the deadline to file your taxes is April 15th, and you can find help and resources by going online to libertytax.com. Also of note coming up in the next week is the St. Jude Radiothon that's happening on our sister stations, AM 1310 The Light, 106.7 WTLC, and Hot 96.3. They're all of our sister stations, so if you want to listen in and learn about St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, You can do that on March 5th. That's Thursday from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. You can also learn how to become a partner in hope and help save those kids. If you want to reach out or if you have topics you'd like me to cover, you can reach me at Metheny, that's EMETHENY, at radio-1.com. Thank you for listening, and please join me again next week. Until then, have a great week.
Radio Now 100.9's Indy Connection with Emily Metheny.